The thing that had been living inside Ethan Carter's face for 11 days finally saw daylight at 10:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and it was still alive. Dr. Sarah Bennett lifted the forceps into the harsh surgical light. Dangling from the steel tips, a pale, segmented larva writhed and curled, its tiny black hooks glistening with tissue fluid, 2 inches of pure nightmare pulled from human flesh. "Oh my God," Nurse Jessica whispered. Behind the glass partition, Linda Carter's hand flew to her mouth. 46 years of marriage, and she'd never seen her husband look so small, so broken, lying on that table. But Ethan wasn't looking at the creature. His eyes were fixed on the young doctor assisting, his daughter Rebecca, tears streaming behind her surgical mask. The horror wasn't just what came out, it was what was about to come out. 11 days earlier, none of them knew how a simple camping trip would crack open a secret 22 years buried. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The August sun hung over Austin, Texas like a punishment. Heat shimmered off the pavement in waves, turning the air thick and heavy. Inside the 2-story ranch house on Meadowbrook Drive, the morning routine unfolded with the precision of 46 years of practice. Ethan Carter stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Best Coach." At 42, he still had the build of the athlete he'd once been. Broad shoulders, strong hands, the kind of frame that came from years of teaching teenagers how to throw a football. His sandy brown hair was going gray at the temples now, and the laugh lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent grooves. But his presence still filled a room. The house itself told their story in snapshots. Framed photos lined the hallway. Ethan in his coaching uniform, arm around championship teams. Linda at the hospital where she'd worked as a nurse for 30 years before retiring. Their daughter, Rebecca's medical school graduation, though that photo sat face down now, had for 3 years. On the mantel, an American flag folded into a tight triangle. In a drawer buried under old receipts, military medals that never saw daylight. Linda emerged from the bedroom, reading glasses perched on her nose, silver hair still damp from the shower. She was 64 but carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd weathered storms and refused to break. Her hands, gentle from decades of patient care, reached for her own coffee mug. They moved around each other like dancers who'd learned every step, every turn. He grabbed the cream before she asked. She handed him the sports section without looking up from the local news. The radio played softly in the background, an oldies station, always oldies. This morning it was Sam Cooke, "You Send Me." "How was the camping trip?" Linda asked, finally glancing at him over her newspaper. Ethan shrugged, rolling his shoulder as if working out a kink. "Same as always. Kids complained about mosquitoes, told ghost stories, burned marshmallows. Tyler Morrison nearly set his sleeping bag on fire." "Sounds about right." She smiled, but her eyes, still that sharp blue that had caught him at 20, studied his face. "You look tired. 3 nights on the ground'll do that." He drained his coffee, set the mug in the sink. "I'm not 20 anymore. None of us are." She stood, smoothed his collar with those gentle hands. Her fingers paused at his neck, just below his ear. "What's this?" Ethan touched the spot reflexively. A small bump, tender under his fingertips. "Just a bug bite, probably. You know how bad the mosquitoes are out at Hill Country." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. That look she gave when she didn't quite believe him, but wasn't ready to push. "Put some cortisone on it." "Yes, ma'am." He kissed her forehead, grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. As he headed out to his truck, neither of them could have known that the small red bump was just the beginning, that something was already growing, feeding, waiting beneath his skin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of heat that made the air feel solid. Ethan stood in the bathroom, fresh from the shower, steam still clinging to the mirror. He dragged a hand across the glass, clearing a circle of visibility, and reached for his electric razor. That's when he saw it clearly for the first time. The bump had grown overnight. What Linda had noticed yesterday was now unmistakable. A raised red circle on his right cheek, no longer the size of a mosquito bite, but closer to a pea. The skin around it looked tight, almost shiny, and when he pressed his fingertip against it, a sharp sting radiated down into his jaw. Probably just swollen, he muttered to his reflection, trying to convince himself. 3 days of sweat and dirt'll do that. He picked up the razor and guided it carefully around the bump, but his hand wasn't quite steady. The vibration of the motor seemed to agitate something beneath the skin. For just a moment, so brief he almost dismissed it, he felt a sensation that made his stomach drop. Movement, not a pulse, not a muscle twitch, something else, something that felt deliberate, like a shift in position. Ethan's hand froze mid-stroke. He stared at the bump in the mirror, waiting for the sensation to repeat. Seconds stretched out. Nothing, just his own heartbeat pounding in his ears and the hum of the razor in his hand. "You're losing it, Carter," he said aloud, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the small bathroom. He switched off the razor and set it down with more force than necessary. "Too much sun. That's all." But as he splashed cold water on his face, his fingers kept drifting back to the spot, pressing gently, testing. Each touch brought that same sharp sting, and beneath it, something that felt almost like pressure pushing back. He dried his face and headed downstairs, where Linda had already set out his lunch bag and travel mug. The morning ritual continued, keys, wallet, phone, but his mind stayed upstairs, fixed on that small red circle that shouldn't feel so wrong. The drive to Austin Memorial High School took 20 minutes through increasingly dense traffic. Ethan's truck, a 15-year-old Ford with a cracked windshield and a bumper sticker that read, "Home of the Wildcats," knew the route by heart. He pulled into the faculty parking lot at 7:23 a.m., grabbed his gym bag from the passenger seat, and headed inside. The school smelled like every high school in America: floor wax, cafeteria food, and the particular musk of teenagers who'd discovered deodorant but didn't always remember to use it. Lockers slammed. Voices echoed off linoleum. Someone's phone was blasting music until a teacher's sharp voice cut it off. Ethan's office sat just off the main gymnasium, a cramped space filled with play diagrams, equipment catalogs, and photos of championship teams stretching back 18 years. He dropped his bag, pulled on his whistle, and headed out to face first period PE. The sophomore class was already gathering in the gym, a chaotic mix of athletic kids eager to play and others who treated PE like a prison sentence. Tyler Morrison, all elbows and acne, the kind of kid who'd grow into himself eventually but hadn't yet, was bouncing a basketball badly, each dribble going in a different direction. "All right, listen up." Ethan's voice cut through the noise like it always did. "We're running volleyball drills today. Partner up, 1 ball per pair, and I want to see clean sets. No lazy hands." The class groaned in unison but began to comply. Ethan walked the perimeter, correcting form, offering encouragement, keeping one eye on the clock. It was during a water break 20 minutes into class that Tyler jogged over, squinting at him with the brutal honesty only teenagers possessed. "Yo, Coach Carter," Tyler said, unscrewing his water bottle. "You got something on your face." "Right there." He pointed at his own cheek. "Looks kinda gnarly." Ethan's hand moved reflexively to the bump. It felt warm under his fingertips, warmer than the rest of his skin, warmer than it should be. "Thanks for the medical diagnosis, WebMD," he shot back with a grin he didn't feel. Now go practice your serve before I make you run laps." Tyler laughed and jogged off. But Ethan didn't laugh. He pulled his phone from his pocket, flipped the camera to selfie mode, and zoomed in on his cheek. The bump was definitely bigger. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The red had deepened to an angry crimson, spreading in a faint halo around the central raised area. And there, in the very center, barely visible but undeniably present, was a tiny dark spot. Not a scab, not a scratch, something else. Something that looked almost like a puncture. A whistle shrieked across the gym. Not his, another teacher's, and Ethan pocketed his phone quickly. He forced his attention back to the class, but his mind was elsewhere, cataloging symptoms like Linda used to do when she'd come home from the hospital. Swelling, heat, discoloration, puncture wound, spider bite, he decided. Had to be. He remembered a camping trip back in '98 when a brown recluse had gotten him on the arm. It had looked similar, that same angry red, that same heat. He'd ended up in the hospital for 3 days, but he'd been fine. Eventually, the thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. By lunchtime, the discomfort had evolved into a dull, persistent ache. Ethan sat in the teacher's lounge, a sandwich untouched on the table in front of him, scrolling through his phone. His search history told its own story. Spider bite symptoms. Skin infection home treatment. When to see a doctor for insect bite. The articles all said the same thing. Watch for increasing pain, spreading redness, fever, signs of infection. See a doctor if symptoms worsen after 48 hours. It had been less than 48 hours since he'd first noticed it. He could wait. Tom Reynolds walked in, no relation, despite the shared last name, but they'd taught together for 20 years and fallen into the kind of easy friendship that didn't require much maintenance. Tom was older, 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his youth working outdoors before settling into teaching history. "Jesus, Carter." Tom stopped mid-step, squinting at Ethan's face. "You look like you got stung by a whole hornet's nest." "Spider bite," Ethan said, not looking up from his phone. "Nothing serious." Tom grabbed a chair, spun it backward, and straddled it with the casual authority of a man who'd been teaching teenagers longer than some of his colleagues had been alive. "You sure? My granddad, God rest him, had something like that once, out in the field back in the '50s. Ethan finally looked up. "Yeah?" "Said it felt like something was living in there." Tom's eyes were distant, remembering. "Swelled up something fierce. Wouldn't go to a doctor. Stubborn old bastard. Finally dug the damn thing out himself with a fish hook and a bottle of whiskey." Ethan's blood went cold. "What was it?" Tom shrugged. "Never found out. But he said it moved, like it was trying to burrow deeper." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, grinning. "But you should probably see a real doctor. We're not quite as tough as that generation." Tom left for his next class, but his words lingered in the air like smoke. Something living in there, trying to burrow deeper. Ethan's hand drifted to his cheek again, pressed, and this time he couldn't deny what he felt, that shift, that pressure, that sense of something alien responding to his touch. He stood abruptly, sandwich abandoned, and headed for the bathroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. He leaned close to the mirror, tilting his head to catch the light. The bump was the size of a dime now. The skin stretched tight across it, and beneath that skin he could see, or thought he could see, a shadow. Something dark, something that didn't belong. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Johnsons tonight, 7 p.m. He typed back, "Might be a little late. Lot of paperwork." It was a lie. He had no paperwork. But he couldn't face sitting at a dinner table, making small talk, pretending everything was normal when something very much not normal was happening under his skin. That evening, he sat in his truck in the school parking lot long after the building had emptied. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of other sunsets, other places, other times he'd rather forget. His phone sat on the passenger seat, Linda's text still glowing on the screen. He should go home. He should tell her it was getting worse. He should make an appointment, get it checked out, do all the responsible things a 42-year-old man should do. Instead, he sat there, fingers pressed against the bump, feeling that terrible wrongness, and wondering how long he could pretend it was just a spider bite before the truth, whatever that truth was, forced its way to the surface. Tuesday morning broke hot and breathless, the kind of Texas heat that made even the air conditioner struggle. Ethan woke before the alarm, something he'd done for 40 years. But this time it wasn't habit that pulled him from sleep. It was pain. The dull ache from yesterday had sharpened into something more insistent, a throbbing pulse that seemed to have its own rhythm, separate from his heartbeat. He lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to Linda's steady breathing beside him, and touched his cheek with cautious fingers. The bump was bigger, much bigger. He slipped out of bed as quietly as he could and padded to the bathroom. When he flicked on the light, the sight in the mirror made his stomach clench. What had been the size of a dime yesterday was now closer to a quarter. The skin stretched glossy and tight across it, and the redness had spread in a distinct halo pattern, angry crimson fading to pink at the edges. But it was the center that made his breath catch. That dark spot had grown, and around it the skin looked almost translucent, as if something beneath was pressing upward, trying to reach the surface. Ethan leaned closer to the mirror, turned his head to catch the light at different angles. The swelling had distorted the shape of his face slightly, pulling the skin taut. When he pressed his fingertips against it, the pain shot down into his jaw like an electric current, and he had to grip the sink to steady himself. And there it was again, that sensation. This time he couldn't dismiss it. This time he felt it clearly, a ripple beneath the skin, a movement that was distinctly separate from his own pulse, from any muscle contraction. Something shifting position, something alive. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the sink. "No," he whispered to his reflection. "No, that's not possible. It's inflammation. It's fluid. It's infection. It's not—" But his body knew what his mind refused to accept. He splashed cold water on his face, avoiding the bump, and stood there dripping, staring at himself. The face looking back was his, but also not his. Distorted, swollen, harboring something he didn't understand and couldn't name. When he came downstairs, Linda took one look at him and set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. "Ethan, that's not a spider bite. It's fine." The words came out automatically, the same ones he'd been repeating like a mantra. "It's not fine." She stood, crossed to him, and before he could pull away, her nurse's hands were on his face, gentle but firm, assessing. Her fingers probed the edges of the swelling, professional and detached, but he saw the concern flash across her face. "This is infected, badly." "How long has it been like this?" "It's only been a couple days." "A couple days?" Her voice rose slightly, that controlled frustration he'd heard before when he'd tried to tough out the flu or work through a twisted ankle. "This kind of swelling doesn't happen in a couple days with a normal bite. You need to see a doctor. Today." "I'll call Dr. Morrison. Make an appointment for Friday." "Friday?" Linda's blue eyes flashed. "Ethan, this is Tuesday. Look at your face. Look at it. That needs to be seen now." He pulled away, moved to the coffee pot to avoid her gaze. "I've got practice this afternoon. The Johnson dinner tonight. I can't just cancel them." "Linda, we're going to the emergency room." Her voice had that steel in it now, the voice she'd used with difficult patients with their daughter when Rebecca was being stubborn. "Today?" "This afternoon if you won't go now." They stared at each other across the kitchen, 46 years of marriage creating a language that didn't need words. She knew he was scared. He knew she was terrified. And they both knew that something was very wrong. "Friday," he said finally, the compromise of a man who knew he was losing but couldn't quite surrender. "I promise. If it's not better by Friday, we'll go to the ER." Linda's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I'm calling Dr. Morrison myself. First thing. And if I can't get you in, then we'll go to the ER," he finished. "I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. At school, the stares were worse. Students did double takes in the hallway. Fellow teachers asked if he was okay with voices that said they already knew he wasn't. By third period, Ethan had retreated to his office, door closed, the lights off. He sat at his desk in the dimness, phone in hand, scrolling through medical websites with increasing desperation. The images that came up for infected insect bite didn't look like what he had. Cellulitis, abscess, lymphangitis, none of them quite matched. The articles about parasites made his skin crawl, but even those didn't seem right. What he really wanted was an explanation that didn't require a hospital. Because hospitals meant questions, meant examinations, meant people touching him and prodding him and maybe finding something he didn't want found. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Dr. Morrison can see you Friday at 10 a.m. But if it gets worse, you go to ER. No arguments." He typed back, "Deal." But even as he sent it, he could feel the wrongness spreading. The ache had become a constant companion now, a low drumbeat of pain that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. And worse, there was a sensation of fullness, of pressure, as if his skin was a container stretched to capacity. That afternoon, alone in his office during planning period, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one that stuck and required a hard yank to open. Inside, beneath old playbooks and forgotten office supplies, was a flask of whiskey. It had been there since Tom Reynolds had given it to him as a joke 5 Christmases ago. He'd never opened it. He opened it now. The whiskey burned going down, but it dulled the edge of the pain, made the fear slightly more manageable. He sat there in the dark, taking small sips, touching his cheek with increasing frequency, as if monitoring the enemy's movements. When the final bell rang at 3:15, he was still sitting there. That evening, he and Linda drove to the Johnsons' house in silence. They were old friends, the kind you accumulate over decades of living in the same neighborhood, cookouts and Christmas cards, and the casual intimacy of shared history. But tonight, Ethan felt like an imposter, wearing a mask of normalcy over something fundamentally wrong. Diane Johnson answered the door with her usual bright smile, but it faltered when she saw his face. "Oh, Ethan, what happened?" "Spider bite," he said, the lie coming easier now. "Looks worse than it is." They sat down to dinner, pot roast, Linda's favorite, but Ethan could barely eat. Every movement of his jaw sent shocks of pain through his face. He pushed food around his plate, contributed minimally to the conversation, and felt Linda's worried glances like weights. "You know," Mike Johnson said halfway through the meal, his engineer's mind already analyzing, "I had a buddy who got bit by a brown recluse once. Nasty stuff. The venom actually kills the tissue around the bite. He ended up with a hole in his leg you could fit a quarter in." "Mike," Diane said sharply. "What?" "I'm just saying, if that's what it is, he should get it checked out." "Those things can get serious fast." Ethan forced a smile. "Thanks for the concern. Got a doctor's appointment Friday." But Mike was shaking his head. "My buddy waited too long. Ended up in the hospital for a week. Almost lost the leg." He leaned forward, and Ethan could see genuine concern in his eyes. "Don't mess around with this stuff, Ethan. It's not worth it." Linda's hand found Ethan's under the table, squeezed hard. A message. See? Even Mike knows. They left early, using Ethan's obvious discomfort as an excuse. In the truck, Linda didn't say anything for the first few blocks. Then, "Mike's right. You're being stubborn and stupid and—" "I know." "Then why?" "Because I'm scared." The words burst out of him, loud in the confined space of the truck cab. "Okay. I'm scared. I'm scared of what they'll find. I'm scared of hospitals and doctors and—" He stopped, the rest of the sentence caught in his throat. Scared of what they might ask. Scared of what they might discover. Scared of records being pulled, of questions about his past, of doors being opened that he'd spent 22 years keeping locked. Linda was quiet for a long moment, then softly, "I know you are, baby, but fear can't be the thing that kills you." At home, Ethan stood in the bathroom once more, examining his face in the harsh light. The swelling had continued to grow throughout the day. It was the size of a golf ball now, distorting his features, making him look like a stranger to himself. He pressed his fingers against it, gentle, testing, and felt it again, that movement, that shift. And this time it was stronger, more pronounced, like something adjusting its grip, settling into position. "What are you?" he whispered to his reflection. His reflection didn't answer, but his body did. A wave of nausea rolled through him, followed by a chill despite the warm night. His skin felt feverish, and when he touched his forehead, it was hot. In the bedroom, Linda was already in bed, reading glasses on, a book in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the decision form on her face even before she spoke. "We're going to the hospital tomorrow." "Linda, no." She set the book aside, removed her glasses. "No more arguments, no more delays. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we're going to Del Seaton, and you're going to let them help you." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist he'd be fine, that it just needed a few more days, that Friday was close enough. But he was so tired. Tired of the pain, tired of the fear, tired of carrying weights no one else could see. "Okay," he whispered. He climbed into bed, lying on his right side to keep pressure off his face. Linda turned off the light, but neither of them slept. They lay there in the darkness, her hand finding his, holding tight like she could anchor him to safety through sheer force of will. At 2:47 a.m. it happened. Ethan was in that strange state between sleep and waking when he felt it, a distinct, deliberate movement beneath his skin, not a flutter, not a pulse, a crawl, like something with a will of its own, shifting position, adjusting, preparing. He bolted upright with a strangled cry, hands clawing at his face. "Get it out! Get it out!" The bedroom light blazed on. Linda was there, hands on his shoulders, voice cutting through his panic. "Ethan! Ethan, look at me!" But he couldn't stop. His fingers dug at the swelling, desperate to reach whatever was beneath, to tear it out, to end this nightmare. "Ethan!" Linda's hands caught his wrists, pulled them away from his face with surprising strength. "Stop! You're hurting yourself!" He was sobbing now, great heaving gasps that hurt his jaw, his face, everything. "There's something in there, Linda. Something alive. I can feel it moving. I can feel it." "I know." Her voice was steady now, that nurse's calm in a crisis. "I know, baby. We're going to the hospital. Right now. No more waiting." She was already moving, grabbing clothes, grabbing his phone, keys, wallet. Within 5 minutes they were in the truck, Ethan in the passenger seat, still shaking, Linda driving with the kind of focused intensity that erased 46 years and made her 20 again, young and fierce and unwilling to lose. The streets were empty at 3 a.m., just the occasional truck or late shift worker heading home. Red lights became suggestions. Speed limits were irrelevant. Linda drove like she was racing death itself. "It's going to be okay," she kept saying. "It's going to be okay. They'll fix it. They'll get it out." whatever it is. But Ethan couldn't respond. He sat there, hands pressed against his face, feeling that terrible presence beneath his skin and wondering what else might come out when the doctors finally cut him open. What other secrets might spill forth? What other things he'd buried might finally claw their way to the surface? Dell Seton Medical Center rose against the dark sky like a cathedral of fluorescent light and desperate hope. Linda pulled up to the emergency entrance, tires squealing, and before the truck had fully stopped, she was already out, already running around to help him. "Help!" she called to the night shift security guard. "I need help! My husband—" The guard took one look at Ethan's face and was already reaching for his radio. The automatic doors slid open, swallowing them into light and antiseptic air, and the beginning of the end of everything Ethan Carter had spent 22 years trying to forget. The emergency room at 3:17 a.m. existed in its own strange time zone, too late for the evening rush of accidents, too early for the morning's heart attacks and falls. A skeletal night crew moved through the fluorescent-lit corridors, with the weary efficiency of people who'd seen everything and were no longer surprised by anything. Except Ethan's face made them pause. The triage nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that had started 1,000 IVs in the dark, took one look at the swelling and immediately upgraded his status. "How long has this been like this?" "4 days," Linda answered when Ethan didn't respond. He sat hunched in the wheelchair the security guard had brought, still trembling from what had happened at home. "And it's been growing the whole time?" "Yes. Fast." The nurse made a note, wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Ethan's arm. The numbers made her frown. "BP's elevated. Heart rate, too. Sir, can you tell me, have you felt any movement? Any sensation of something shifting under the skin?" Ethan's eyes met hers, and she saw the answer before he spoke. "Yes." She nodded once, crisp and professional, but something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "Okay, we're taking you straight back. Room 4. Room 4 was all white walls and stainless steel, the kind of sterile environment that smelled like bleach and fear. A young nurse, Jessica, her badge read, helped Ethan onto the exam table while Linda hovered nearby, her face pale but determined. "Let's get some vitals," Jessica said, her voice gentle. She worked quickly, pressing sensors to his chest, clipping a pulse oximeter to his finger. The monitors beeped to life, displaying numbers that made her exchange a glance with the triage nurse. Temperature, 100.9 to go. Blood pressure, 148/92. Heart rate, 118. "Okay, Mr. Carter, I'm going to examine the area now. This might be tender." Tender didn't begin to cover it. When Jessica's gloved fingers probed the edges of the swelling, Ethan had to grip the sides of the exam table to keep from crying out. The pain was sharp and immediate, radiating down into his jaw, up into his temple. But worse than the pain was what he felt when she pressed slightly harder. That movement again, more pronounced now, like something retreating from her touch, burrowing deeper. "Did you feel that?" he gasped. Jessica's professional mask slipped for just a second. "Yes, I felt it." The triage nurse stepped forward. "I'm paging Dr. Bennett. She'll want to see this." They left him alone then, or as alone as you could be in an ER with only a curtain separating you from other people's emergencies. Linda pulled a chair close to the exam table, took his hand in both of hers. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "we're going to face it, together, like we always have." Ethan wanted to believe her. Wanted to draw strength from those words the way he had for 46 years. But there was a voice in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like the desert wind, like gunfire in the distance, like a friend dying in his arms, that whispered, "Some things you have to face alone." 15 minutes later, Dr. Sarah Bennett pushed through the curtain. She was younger than Ethan expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was the way she moved that caught his attention, that economy of motion that spoke of discipline, of training that went beyond medical school. "Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Bennett." She extended her hand, and when he shook it, her grip was firm, confident. "I understand you've got something concerning going on." "That's one way to put it," Ethan said, trying for humor and failing. "Doctor—" Bennett pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and stepped close, tilting his face toward the light. Her examination was thorough but gentle, fingers probing the swelling with the kind of expertise that came from years of practice. "How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" 4, maybe 5 days. "Any recent travel? International? Tropical regions?" "No, just camping. Hill country, about 10 days ago." Her fingers paused. Hill country. Lots of wildlife out there, insects, ticks, various vectors. She leaned closer, examining the dark spot in the center of the swelling. "This looks like a puncture wound. Very small, but definite. Do you remember being bitten by anything specific?" Ethan tried to remember. The camping trip felt like a lifetime ago now, but he forced his mind back. Mosquitoes, yes, plenty of those. Some kind of flying beetle that had dive-bombed the campfire. He'd fallen asleep sitting up against a tree trunk, shirtless, while the students were in their tents. Had something bitten him then? "I don't remember anything specific," he admitted. Dr. Bennett stepped back, considering. Then she turned to Jessica. "I want an ultrasound, portable unit. And let's get labs, CBC, comprehensive metabolic panel, inflammatory markers. I also want blood cultures." "You think it's infected?" Linda asked. "I think there's something foreign in there," Dr. Bennett said carefully. "And I need to see what we're dealing with before I can make a proper assessment." She turned back to Ethan, and something in her expression shifted. "I noticed the dog tags," she said quietly. "You served?" Ethan's hand moved reflexively to his chest, where the metal tags rested under his shirt. He'd worn them so long he usually forgot they were there. "Army, 2001 to 2003. Thank you for your service." Dr. Bennett's voice carried a weight of understanding. "I was Army too, medic, 2007 to 2012, Iraq." Something passed between them then, a recognition that Linda couldn't fully share. The membership in a club nobody wanted to join. The understanding of what it meant to see things, to do things, to carry things that civilians couldn't comprehend. "Then you know," Ethan said, and it wasn't really a question. "I know that sometimes the body holds on to things," Dr. Bennett replied. "Physical things, emotional things, and sometimes those things need to come out, one way or another." Before he could respond, Jessica returned wheeling the ultrasound machine. The screen flickered to life as Dr. Bennett prepared the probe, squirting clear gel onto Ethan's cheek. "This might be uncomfortable," she warned, "but I need to see what's under there." The probe pressed against his skin, and the monitor filled with grainy black and white shapes that meant nothing to Ethan. "Doctor." Bennett's face was intent, focused, as she adjusted the angle, moved the probe slightly, zoomed in and out. Then she stopped. "There," she said quietly. Linda leaned forward. "What? What is it?" On the screen, amid the chaos of tissue and fluid, was a shape, elongated, curved, segmented like a series of small beads, and as they watched, as all three of them stared at the monitor in disbelief, the shape moved, not a twitch, not a flutter of blood flow or muscle contraction, a deliberate, autonomous movement like something repositioning itself, like something alive and aware. "Oh my God," Linda whispered. Ethan felt his gorge rise. Seeing it was different from feeling it. Seeing it made it real in a way that sensation alone hadn't. There was something living inside his face, something with a body, with segments, with the ability to move independently. "What is it?" His voice came out strangled. "Doctor." Bennett's face was professionally calm, but her eyes betrayed concern. "It's organic, definitely biological, possibly parasitic." She saved an image, marked it with digital crosshairs. "But I can't give you a definitive identification from ultrasound alone." "Can you get it out?" "Yes." Her answer was immediate, firm. "I need to extract it. Today. Now. The sooner we remove it, the less risk of complications." "What kind of complications?" Linda's nurse training was showing through, wanting specifics, needing to understand the risks. "Infection is the primary concern," Dr. Bennett explained. "Whatever this is, it's been feeding on tissue. That creates an environment for bacterial growth. If it were to die in there, or if it were to rupture during extraction, we could be looking at a severe systemic infection, possibly sepsis." Ethan's mouth went dry. Sepsis. He'd seen sepsis in the field, had watched strong men waste away from infections that turned their blood toxic. "How soon can you do it?" "I need to prep an OR, get consent forms signed, assemble a team." Dr. Bennett checked her watch. 2 hours, maybe less if we can fast-track it." She started to turn away, then paused. "Mr. Carter, I need to ask, do you have family nearby, besides your wife?" The question hit harder than it should have. "Family. We have a daughter, Rebecca." "Is she local?" Linda answered when Ethan couldn't. "Yes. She's a doctor, too. Surgical resident. Here, at Dell Seton." Dr. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. "Would you like me to contact her? For something like this, having family present?" "No," Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. "She doesn't need to. We haven't spoken in 3 years," Linda finished quietly. They had a falling out. The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Bennett looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. "I see. Well, the decision is yours. But I'll be honest, this is a delicate procedure. If there are things that need to be said, people who need to be told, now would be the time." She left them with that, disappearing through the curtain to make arrangements, to prepare to cut into Ethan's face and remove the thing that had been growing there, feeding there, living there. Linda's hand tightened on his. "I'm calling Rebecca." "Linda, don't. She needs to know. She's your daughter, and she needs to know her father is having surgery. She won't come. After what I did, after what I said, she'll come." Linda's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Because, despite everything, despite the silence and the hurt and the stubbornness on both sides, you're still her father. And she's still my daughter. And this family has been broken long enough." She pulled out her phone, stepped away from the exam table. Ethan watched her dial, watched her face as she waited for an answer. Then, "Rebecca, it's Mom. I need you to come to the ER. It's your father. He's having surgery." He couldn't hear Rebecca's response, but he saw Linda's face crumple slightly before she regained control. "Please, honey, just come. Room 4. She hung up, came back to his side. "She's coming." Ethan felt something twist in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the parasite in his face. "She hates me." "She doesn't hate you. She's hurt. There's a difference." "I don't know what to say to her." Linda cupped his uninjured cheek gently. "Then start with 'I'm sorry.' Start with 'I love you.' Start with the truth, Ethan. Because whatever's in your face isn't the only thing that needs to come out." Nurse Jessica returned then with a clipboard full of consent forms. Pages of legal language about risks and complications, about the possibility of scarring, of nerve damage, of things going wrong in ways they couldn't predict. Ethan signed them all without reading, his hand shaking slightly, leaving signatures that looked nothing like his usual careful script. The minutes crawled by. Linda sat beside him, holding his hand, not speaking because there was nothing more to say. The ER continued its nocturnal rhythm around them. A car accident victim being rushed past, someone moaning in the next bay, the distant sound of a code being called. And then the curtain moved aside, and there she was, Rebecca. She stood in the doorway in scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and for a moment Ethan couldn't breathe. She looked so much like Linda had at that age. Same blue eyes, same determined set to her jaw, same presence that said she could handle whatever came at her. But it was the way she looked at him that hurt most. Not with hate, not even with anger. With a kind of careful neutrality, like she was looking at a patient instead of her father, like 3 years had built a wall so high she didn't know how to scale it anymore. "Mom said you're having surgery." Her voice was professional, controlled. "Rebecca," Ethan's voice cracked on her name. "What kind of procedure? What's the diagnosis?" Linda stood, moved toward their daughter. "Honey, there's something foreign in his face. They don't know what it is yet. They need to extract it." Rebecca's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing concern underneath. "Foreign body? What kind?" "Biological," Linda said. "Possibly parasitic. Dr. Bennett is doing the extraction." "Sarah Bennett?" Rebecca's attention sharpened. "She's good. One of the best we have for this kind of thing." A pause. "I want to assist." "Rebecca, you don't have to," Ethan started. "I'm not asking permission." Her eyes met his finally, and in them he saw 3 years of hurt, of anger, of a daughter who'd felt abandoned by the one man who was supposed to stand by her no matter what. "I'm a surgical resident. This is what I do. And despite everything, you're still my patient." "Not my father, my patient." The word choice cut deeper than any scalpel could. "Okay," he whispered. Dr. Bennett returned, saw Rebecca, and something passed between the two doctors, a quick conversation in medical shorthand that excluded everyone else. Then Dr. Bennett nodded. "Good. I wanted you on this anyway. Your expertise with foreign body extractions is exactly what we need." "I'll scrub in," Rebecca said. Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked at Ethan again. "You're going to be fine. This is a routine procedure. In and out in under an hour." She left before he could respond, before he could say any of the things that had been building in his chest for 3 years. And Linda's hand found his again. She came. She came as a doctor, not as a daughter. She came. That's what matters. An orderly arrived with a gurney, helped transfer Ethan from the exam table. As they wheeled him toward the surgical suites, Ethan caught a glimpse of himself in a window's reflection. The swelling had grown even more, distorting his features, making him look like something from a horror movie. But it wasn't the physical monster that scared him. It was what might be revealed when they cut him open. What other things lived beneath his skin? What other secrets might spill out when the first cut was made? They pushed through double doors into the pre-op area, where the lights were brighter and the air smelled like antiseptic and fear. Linda walked beside the gurney, still holding his hand, and somewhere ahead, his daughter was scrubbing in, preparing to cut into her father's flesh. "Linda," Ethan said suddenly, urgently, "there's a box. In the garage." Metal box labeled Army. If something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong. But if it does, there's a letter in that box for Rebecca. She needs to read it. She needs to know. "You'll tell her yourself. When this is over, you'll tell her everything." They stopped outside the OR. This was as far as Linda could go. She leaned down, kissed his forehead gently, avoiding his swollen cheek. "I love you," she whispered. 46 years. And I've loved you every single day, even when you made it hard, even when you pushed me away. I love you. I love you too." The words felt inadequate for everything he wanted to say, for everything he'd never said well enough. Then they were moving again, through the OR doors, into that bright surgical theater where Dr. Bennett and Rebecca waited in their gowns and masks, where instruments gleamed on steel trays, where the truth, all the truths, were about to be laid bare. As the anesthesiologist adjusted his IV line as the surgical lights blazed overhead, Ethan's last thought before the sedation took him was this: some wounds never heal until you let someone else see them. Then darkness took him, and the cutting began. The surgical lights were merciless, turning everything beneath them into a stage where there was nowhere to hide. Ethan lay on the operating table, conscious but sedated, floating in that strange twilight space where you could feel everything, but the pain was distant, muted, like it was happening to someone else. Dr. Bennett stood at his right side, masked and gowned, her eyes visible above the blue surgical mask, calm, focused, ready. Rebecca was across from her, similarly dressed, and though Ethan couldn't see most of her face, he could read tension in the set of her shoulders, in the way her gloved hands remained perfectly still against her sides. "Mr. Carter, you're going to feel some pressure," Dr. Bennett said, her voice steady and professional. "We've given you local anesthetic and light sedation. You won't feel pain, but you'll be aware. If at any point you need us to stop, just raise your left hand. Understand?" Ethan tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. He managed a small nod. "Good. Let's begin." She turned to the surgical nurse. "Scalpel?" The instrument appeared in her hand, a slim blade that caught the light. Ethan's heart rate spiked. He could hear it in the monitor's accelerating beeps. But he couldn't look away from Rebecca's eyes. She was staring at the surgical field, at his face, professional and detached, and he wondered if she was thinking about the last time she'd looked at him 3 years ago, when he'd said things he couldn't take back. The scalpel touched his skin. There was pressure, just as Dr. Bennett had promised, a sensation of something parting, opening. He heard a sound, wet, organic, the sound of a blade moving through flesh, and his stomach lurched despite the sedation. "Steady," Dr. Bennett murmured. "You're doing fine." Blood welled up, was immediately suctioned away by Nurse Jessica. The suction made a gurgling sound that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet OR. Ethan's fingers gripped the sides of the table, knuckles white beneath the surgical drapes. Dr. Bennett worked with precise movements, widening the incision carefully. "There's significant inflammation," she said, speaking now for the benefit of the surgical record and Rebecca. "Surrounding tissue is angry but viable. No signs of necrosis. Approaching the abscess cavity now." The pressure increased. Ethan felt her instruments moving inside his face. Not pain, but wrongness, the sensation of being opened, of becoming permeable to the world. His breathing quickened. "Almost there," Dr. Bennett said. Then to Jessica, "Irrigation, please." A warm flush of saline solution, more suctioning, and then, "There's the foreign body." Dr. Bennett's voice remained steady, but something shifted in it. Recognition, maybe concern. "Rebecca, can you see it?" His daughter leaned closer. Ethan watched her eyes narrow, watched them widen slightly. "Yes, I see it." "What is it?" Ethan managed to ask, the words slurring. "Hold still, Mr. Carter," Dr. Bennett said. She reached for a different instrument, forceps, long and delicate. "This is going to feel strange." Strange didn't begin to cover it. The moment the forceps made contact with whatever was inside him, Ethan felt it move. Not the subtle shift he'd experienced before, but a violent recoil, like a living thing trying to escape. The sensation was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that a sound escaped his throat, half gasp, half sob. "It's mobile," Dr. Bennett said, her voice tight now. "Actively mobile. It's trying to retreat deeper." "Can you get a grip on it?" Rebecca asked. All business now, doctor to doctor, no hint of their relationship in her voice. "Working on it." The forceps moved again, probing. It has some kind of anchoring mechanism. Hooks or spines embedded in the surrounding tissue. If I pull too hard, I could tear." She stopped. Regrouped. "New approach. I'm going to use blunt dissection to free it first. Rebecca, I need you to provide countertension on the lateral margin." They worked in tandem, and Ethan could feel it all. The tugging, the careful separation of tissue, the irrigation fluid flowing through the cavity they were creating in his face. The monitors beeped steadily, tracking his vital signs, but his heart felt like it was trying to escape his chest. And then Rebecca spoke, her voice careful, controlled, but with something underneath. "Dr. Bennett, look at this." There was a pause, a shift in the air. "Is that—" Dr. Bennett's voice carried disbelief now. "That's metallic. There's metal in here." "Fragments," Rebecca confirmed. "Small pieces, embedded in the deep tissue." Ethan's blood turned to ice. No, they weren't supposed to find that. Not yet. Not like this. "Mr. Carter?" Dr. Bennett said, and her voice had changed completely, become softer, more personal. "You have shrapnel in your face. Old shrapnel from the look of the scarring around it. How long has this been here?" He couldn't answer, couldn't speak. The sedation made it impossible to form the words, but even if he could, what would he say? That he'd carried those fragments for 22 years? That they were pieces of the explosion that killed his best friend? That he'd let them stay because they felt like penance, like punishment, like the physical manifestation of guilt he deserved to carry? "Dad?" Rebecca's voice cracked on the word. The first time she'd called him that in 3 years. "Dad, did you know this was here?" He managed the smallest nod. "How—" She stopped herself, shook her head. "We need to focus. Extract the parasite first, then we can address the shrapnel." But something had shifted. The professional distance Rebecca had maintained was fracturing, and Ethan could see it in her eyes. Confusion, hurt, and underneath it all, the dawning realization that there was so much about her father she didn't know, had never known. Dr. Bennett returned her attention to the extraction. "The organism has entrenched itself near the shrapnel. That might be why it chose this location. The old wound created a weak point in the tissue, easier to penetrate." She adjusted her grip on the forceps. "I'm going to try again. Rebecca, be ready with the hemostats if we get bleeding." This time, Dr. Bennett's approach was different. She used the forceps to grasp the organism closer to what she called the oral end, where it had presumably burrowed in. The sensation was indescribable. Ethan felt the pull, felt the resistance, felt something inside him that absolutely should not be there finally beginning to give way. "Got it," Dr. Bennett breathed. "It's releasing." Slowly now. The extraction felt like it took hours, though it was probably only seconds. A steady, careful pull, the sound of tissue separating, the click of instruments, the mechanical breathing of the monitors. Ethan's hands gripped the table so hard his joints ached. Rebecca's eyes were locked on the surgical field, wide and unblinking. And then with a sound that Ethan would hear in his nightmares for years, a wet, sucking release. It came free. Dr. Bennett lifted the forceps into the light. Even through his sedation, even with his limited view, Ethan saw it. A pale, segmented creature, perhaps 2 inches long, writhing in the forceps' grip. Its body was segmented like a caterpillar's, each section ringed with tiny spines. At one end, barely visible, were hook-like structures that must have been anchoring it inside him. It was still moving, still alive, still trying to burrow even now in the air, seeking flesh that was no longer there. "Jesus Christ," Jessica whispered, her professional composure cracking. Rebecca stared at it, and Ethan saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. But she didn't look away. "What is it?" "Botfly larvae, unless I'm very much mistaken," Dr. Bennett said, her voice steady despite what she held. "Cuterebra species, probably, native to this region. The eggs are typically deposited by mosquitoes or other biting insects. They hatch on contact with warm skin and burrow in." She dropped the creature into a specimen jar with a sharp clink. It continued to move, curling and uncurling, alive in its preservation fluid. "I'll send it to pathology for confirmation, but—" She stopped, looking at Ethan's face. Not the surgical site, but his eyes. "Mr. Carter, I need to address the shrapnel. Some of these fragments are close to major blood vessels. They should have been removed years ago." This could still be life-threatening. "Can you remove them now?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight. "Not here. Not like this. This would require a different procedure, proper imaging, possibly a neurosurgeon on standby." Dr. Bennett turned to the surgical nurse. "I'm going to close this wound, get him stable, and then we need a full CT scan. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with." "And if the shrapnel needs to come out?" Rebecca's hands were shaking now. Ethan could see it, the fine tremor she was trying to control. "Then we schedule a proper surgery. But right now, let's finish what we started. Mr. Carter needs closure, antibiotics, and monitoring for infection." Dr. Bennett began the closing process. Irrigation, inspection for any remaining larvae or tissue damage, then the careful work of suturing. Layer by layer, she rebuilt what had been opened, speaking quietly to Rebecca about technique, about tension, about the delicate balance of closing a wound that would heal with minimal scarring. But Ethan barely heard any of it. His mind was racing despite the sedation. They'd found the shrapnel. Rebecca knew now, or at least she knew there was something. Something he'd hidden, something he'd carried. And soon, very soon, she'd ask questions he didn't know how to answer. "Almost done," Dr. Bennett murmured. The final sutures went in, 6 of them, neat and precise. "There. That should hold nicely." She stepped back, examined her work. Good closure, minimal trauma to surrounding tissue. "Mr. Carter, you did very well. The hard part's over." But it wasn't. Ethan knew it wasn't. As they bandaged his face, as they prepared to move him to recovery, Ethan caught Rebecca's eyes again. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part concern, part confusion, part something else. Betrayal, maybe, or just the weight of questions she'd been carrying for 3 years, now compounded by new mysteries. "Dad," she said quietly, and the word was both a question and an accusation. "What happened to you?" Before he could answer, before he could even try, the anesthesia they'd been holding back kicked in fully. The OR began to fade, the lights becoming soft and distant, the voices around him turning to murmurs. His last conscious thought was that he'd survived the extraction, survived the revelation of the shrapnel, but he still hadn't survived the hardest part, telling his daughter the truth about who he was, what he'd done, and why he'd let her go 3 years ago. The darkness took him then, and his last image was of Rebecca's eyes, asking questions he'd spent 22 years trying not to answer. When he woke again, it would be to a different kind of pain. Not physical, but the kind that came from wounds you'd inflicted on yourself, on the people you loved, wounds that had festered in silence and darkness for far too long. The kind that, unlike the creature they'd pulled from his face, might never fully heal. Ethan woke to the sound of machines beeping in steady rhythm, a metronome marking time in a world that felt wrong. His mouth was dry, tongue thick against his teeth. The right side of his face felt tight, bandaged, and there was a dull ache beneath the gauze that pulsed with each heartbeat. Recovery room. Fluorescent lights dimmed to something almost bearable. The antiseptic smell was stronger here, mixed with something else. Blood, maybe, or the particular scent of medical-grade adhesive. Linda's face swam into view, her eyes red-rimmed but relieved. "Hey," she said softly, her hand finding his. "You're okay. Surgery went well." He tried to speak, but could only manage a croak. "Don't talk yet," she said, reaching for a cup of ice chips. "Here, just a little." The ice was a blessing, cold and clean. He let it melt on his tongue, swallowed, tried again. "Rebecca?" Linda's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's talking with Dr. Bennett." "About the—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "About what they found. The shrapnel. They'd found the shrapnel." "How long?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "The surgery was about 45 minutes. You've been in recovery for 20. They want to monitor you for a few hours, make sure there's no complications, no signs of infection." Ethan closed his eyes. 45 minutes to remove something that had been living in him for days, but 22 years to discover something he'd been carrying all along. The mathematics of secrets, he thought. The way time compressed and expanded depending on what you were hiding. "Ethan." Linda's voice was gentle but firm, the voice she used when she needed him to listen. "The shrapnel. You knew it was there?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. 22 years? Another nod. "From Iraq?" "Yes." The word came out broken. Linda was quiet for a long moment. Her hand stayed in his, warm and steady, but he could feel her pulling away in other ways, retreating into the part of herself where she went to process hurt. "All these years," she finally said. "All these years, and you never told me. Never told anyone." "The medics said it was too deep, too dangerous to remove. Better to leave it." "I don't care what the medics said." Her voice cracked. "I care that you carried that around. Pieces of metal in your body, pieces of war, and you never said a word. What else, Ethan? What else haven't you told me?" Before he could answer, the curtains swept aside and Dr. Bennett entered, tablet in hand, Rebecca behind her. His daughter's face was unreadable, that professional mask back in place. But her eyes were storms. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Bennett said, pulling up a stool. "Let's talk about what we found." She pulled up images on her tablet, CT scans taken while he was still under. The pictures showed his skull in cross-section, gray and white and black, and there, scattered through the soft tissue of his face and neck, were bright white spots, 7 of them. 7 pieces of metal that had been living in him, silent passengers on a journey they'd never asked to take. "These are the shrapnel fragments," Dr. Bennett said, her finger tracing each one. "Most are quite small, a few millimeters, but this one," she zoomed in on a larger piece, "is concerning. It's approximately 8 millimeters, located near the carotid artery and the vagus nerve. It's been there long enough that scar tissue has formed around it, essentially encapsulating it." "Is it dangerous?" Linda asked. "Potentially, yes. If it were to shift, if infection were to develop around it, if the scar tissue were to break down, any of those scenarios could lead to serious complications. Stroke, hemorrhage, nerve damage. So it needs to come out, Rebecca said. Her first words since entering, and they weren't directed at Ethan but at Dr. Bennett. Still avoiding him. Still keeping that distance. That's the question, Dr. Bennett replied. Removing it carries its own risks. We'd need a vascular surgeon, possibly a neurosurgeon, on standby. The procedure would be delicate, and there's a real possibility of causing damage to surrounding structures in the process of extraction. But leaving it in is also a risk, Rebecca pressed. Yes. It's been stable for 22 years, which suggests it may remain stable. But the larvae entry that compromised the tissue integrity created weakness. It could make the area more vulnerable going forward. What do you recommend? Linda asked. Dr. Bennett looked at Ethan. That's ultimately Mr. Carter's decision, but if I were his doctor, which I am, I'd recommend removal. The risk of leaving it outweighs the surgical risk, especially given what just happened. Your body is trying to tell you something, Mr. Carter. Maybe it's time to listen. Ethan stared at the scans, at those bright white fragments that had been part of him for so long he'd forgotten they weren't supposed to be there. 7 pieces. 7 memories. 7 reasons he woke up some nights gasping, reaching for Linda in the dark, needing to know she was real, that he was home, that the war was over. Except it wasn't. Not really. Not when you carried it inside you. When? He asked. We'd need to schedule it properly. A week, maybe 2. Get you healed from this procedure first, then address the shrapnel in a controlled environment. Dr. Bennett stood. Think about it. Talk with your family. Let me know what you decide. She left, taking the images with her, leaving them in the weighted silence she'd created. Rebecca moved to the foot of the bed, arms crossed, that careful neutrality back on her face. You should do it, she said. The surgery. You should do it, Rebecca. Don't. The word was sharp. Don't try to explain right now. Just agree to the surgery. Let them take that stuff out of you. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I will. She nodded once, then turned to leave. Rebecca, wait, please. She stopped, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and the words felt both too much and nowhere near enough. For everything. For what I said 3 years ago, for taking his side, for not being the father you needed. Rebecca's shoulders tensed. For a moment he thought she might walk away without responding. Then she turned and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You want to know what the worst part was? Her voice shook. It wasn't that you defended James. It wasn't even that you took his side over mine. It was that I finally understood why. I saw it, Dad. I saw you looking at him like you were looking in a mirror, like his pain was your pain. Like saving him could somehow save whatever part of you died in Iraq. Rebecca, I'm not done. She took a step closer. I realized that I'd spent my whole life competing with ghosts, with whatever happened over there that you never talked about, with the man you used to be before the war changed you. And I could never win, could I? Because I was real, and they were perfect in their absence. The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark. Ethan felt Linda's hand tighten on his, but he couldn't look away from his daughter's face. You're right, he whispered. You're right about all of it. Then tell me, Rebecca said. And now the tears were falling, tracking down her cheeks. Tell me what happened. Tell me who you were trying to save through James. Tell me why you've been carrying around pieces of war in your body for 22 years and never said a damn word. This was it, the moment he'd been avoiding for 2 decades. The truth he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it wasn't there. His name was Marcus, Ethan began, and his voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. Marcus Williams. He was my best friend. We deployed together, served together, and he died because of me. The room seemed to contract, the walls pressing in. Linda's hand was still in his. Rebecca hadn't moved. But Ethan felt like he was alone, back in that desert heat, back in that impossible moment when he'd had to choose. There was an ambush, he continued, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. IED, then small arms fire. We had multiple casualties. I was a medic, so I was trying to triage, trying to save who I could. But there were two of them, Marcus and a kid, couldn't have been more than 19. Davis, his name was Davis. He paused, swallowed hard. They were both critical, both bleeding out. I had one trauma kit left, one bag of O-negative blood, not enough for both. I had to choose. Rebecca's hand had moved to her mouth. Linda was crying silently beside him. I chose Davis. Younger, better vitals, better chance of survival. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Triage. Save who you can save. But Marcus, his voice broke. Marcus was my brother, not by blood, but in every way that mattered. And I let him die. Ethan, Linda whispered, but he couldn't stop now. He held my hand at the end, looked me right in the eyes and said, "Tell my girls I love them." His wife, Sarah, his daughter, Emma. She was 3 years old. 3. And I couldn't face them after. Couldn't tell them that I'd let their husband, their father, die. So I disappeared, got transferred, got discharged. Came home and pretended I'd never seen combat, never made that choice, never watched my best friend bleed out because I'd decided someone else's life was worth more. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Horror, maybe, or understanding, or both. The shrapnel, she said finally. It's from that explosion? Ethan nodded. RPG fragments. Hit me, hit Marcus, hit Davis. I kept them because it felt like punishment, like if I carried that pain, maybe it would balance out somehow. Maybe it would be enough. Oh, Dad. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. And James, Ethan continued, needing to get it all out now, needing her to understand. When you came to me about the divorce, when you told me about his PTSD, his nightmares, his violence, I saw Marcus. I saw myself. I thought if I could help James, if I could save your marriage, maybe I could finally save Marcus too. I know that doesn't make sense. I know it was wrong, but I can't. He couldn't finish. The sobs came then, deep and wrenching, 22 years of grief finally finding its way out. Linda held him, careful of his bandaged face, and he buried himself in her shoulder like a child. When he finally looked up, Rebecca was crying too. She'd moved closer, was standing right beside the bed now. I became a doctor because of you, she said quietly. Did you know that? You never talked about Iraq, but I knew you'd been a medic. I knew you'd saved people. And I thought if I became a doctor, if I learned to save people too, maybe you'd finally see me. Maybe you'd finally be proud. I was always proud, Ethan choked out. Always. I just didn't know how to show it. Didn't know how to be close when I was carrying so much distance inside me. Rebecca reached out, hesitated, then took his hand, the one Linda wasn't holding. I need time, she said. I need time to process this, to understand it. But Dad, her voice cracked. I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad that thing is out of you. And I'm glad you're finally talking. The box, Ethan said suddenly, urgently. Linda, the box in the garage. Bring it, please. Rebecca needs to see. Linda looked at him, understanding dawning. The letter? Everything. She needs to see everything. Linda hesitated, then nodded. I'll get it. But first you rest. Doctor's orders. She tried for a smile, didn't quite make it. We've got time now. For once, we've got time." But even as she said it, somewhere in the hospital, alarms were beginning to sound. The fever started 3 hours after Ethan was moved from recovery to a standard room. At first it was subtle, a slight warmth to his skin, a faint flush across his forehead. Linda noticed it first. Her nurse's instincts never fully retired, and pressed the call button. By the time the floor nurse arrived, Ethan was shivering, despite the blankets Linda had piled on him. "Temperature's 100.8, the nurse said, checking the digital readout. Her face remained neutral, professional, but Linda saw the flicker of concern. "That's elevated. Let me page the resident on call." Rebecca appeared in the doorway before the page went through, still in her scrubs from assisting with the surgery. She must have been nearby, must have been checking on him even though she'd said she needed time. That knowledge would have comforted Ethan if he'd been lucid enough to process it. But the fever was climbing, and with it came confusion. "Where's my squad?" Ethan mumbled, his eyes unfocused, looking past Linda and Rebecca to something only he could see. "We need to move. Enemy contact. Marcus. Where's Marcus?" "Dad, it's me. Rebecca, you're in the hospital. You're safe." She was already checking his vitals, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her voice shook slightly. "Can't leave him. Can't leave anyone behind." Ethan tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. "No man left behind. That's the rule. That's—" His words dissolved into incoherent muttering. Rebecca pulled back the bandage on his face, and what she saw made her swear under her breath. The surgical site was red, angrier than it should be. The edges of the incision, which had looked clean and precise just hours ago, now showed the telltale signs of inflammation. And there was something else, a thin line of purulent drainage, barely visible but unmistakably present. "He's infected," Rebecca said, reaching for her phone. "I need Dr. Bennett down here now, and get me a CBC, inflammatory markers, blood cultures. Start broad-spectrum antibiotics, vancomycin and piperacillin tazobactam." The room erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses appeared with IV poles and bags of medication. Someone wheeled in a portable monitor. Rebecca barked orders with an authority that made her seem older than her 38 years. And through it all, Ethan drifted further away, lost in fever dreams that were really memories, memories that were really nightmares. Linda stood pressed against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, watching her husband relive a war she'd never understood because he'd never let her in. She heard names she'd never heard before: Marcus, Davis, names that fell from his lips like prayers or curses, she couldn't tell which. Dr. Bennett arrived within minutes, her face grave as she assessed the situation. How fast did this develop? 3 hours post-op, he was stable. Now his temp's 103.1 and climbing. Rebecca's voice was steady, but Linda could see her daughter's hands trembling as she adjusted Ethan's IV. Dr. Bennett examined the surgical site, her touch gentle but thorough. "This is aggressive. Too aggressive for normal post-surgical infection." She looked up, met Rebecca's eyes. "When we were in there, did we get all of it? The entire organism?" Rebecca froze. "You saw it come out. It was intact. But larvae, some species have segments. If even one piece broke off, there would be retained foreign body reaction," Rebecca finished, her face going pale. "The infection would be localized but severe. We need imaging, CT with contrast." "Agreed, but first we need to stabilize him." Dr. Bennett turned to the floor nurse. "Push the antibiotics, get him on pressors if his BP drops below 90 systolic. I want labs every 2 hours. If he continues to decline, we're looking at ICU transfer." Over the next hour, Ethan's condition deteriorated with frightening speed. His temperature peaked at 104.2 degrees. His blood pressure, despite the medications pumping through his veins, began to fall. The monitor's steady beeping became increasingly erratic, alarms firing off with growing frequency, and through it all, he talked. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. I had to choose. I had to—" His voice cracked. "Tell Sarah. Tell Emma. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them—" "Dad, please." Rebecca was at his bedside, gripping his hand. The professional distance she'd maintained was crumbling. "Dad, you need to fight this. You need to stay with us." But Ethan was somewhere else, trapped in March 2003, in a desert half a world away, making a choice he'd never forgive himself for. Linda couldn't take it anymore. She pushed forward, took his other hand, leaned close to his ear. "Ethan Michael Carter, you listen to me. You do not get to leave, not like this. Not before you make things right with your daughter. Not before you face what you've been running from. You survived that war. You survived 22 years of carrying it inside you. You damn well better survive this." For a moment, his eyes focused, found hers. Recognition flickered there, along with something that looked like gratitude, or maybe relief. Then the fever pulled him under again. "We're losing him," Rebecca said, and there was raw panic in her voice now, the doctor's mask completely gone. "Mom, we're losing him." Dr. Bennett was already moving. "Get me a crash cart. Call respiratory therapy. If he codes—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The CT scan, when they finally got him stable enough to transport, revealed the nightmare they'd feared. There, deep in the tissue where the larva had been, was a small density that shouldn't be there. A remnant. A piece left behind. "It's maybe 2 millimeters, the radiologist said, pointing at the screen. "But it's enough. The body's mounting a massive inflammatory response. That's what's causing the sepsis." "Can we go back in?" Rebecca asked. "Extract the remaining piece?" Dr. Bennett was already shaking her head. "Not in his current state. He's too unstable. We need to try to control the infection medically first, get him strong enough to survive another surgery. And if we can't, if the antibiotics don't work?" The silence that followed answered the question better than words could. They moved Ethan to the ICU at 10:03 p.m. The room was a cathedral of machines and monitors, each one tracking a different system, each one broadcasting the story of a body at war with itself. Ventilator, central line, arterial line, Foley catheter. He was more machine than man now, kept alive by technology and the stubborn refusal of his doctors to let him go. Linda sat in a chair beside the bed, holding his hand, refusing to move. Rebecca stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the monitors, as if she could will them to show better numbers through sheer force of concentration. "This is my fault," Rebecca said finally, her voice barely audible. "I was on that surgery. I should have seen it. Should have made sure we got everything." "You can't know that," Linda said. "Even Dr. Bennett didn't see it. I'm his daughter. I should have—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I was so angry at him, so focused on being professional, on keeping my distance, that maybe I wasn't as careful as I should have been. Maybe if I'd been thinking about him as my father instead of just another patient—" "Stop!" Linda's voice was firm. "This is not your fault. The infection, the retained piece, none of it is your fault. And your father—" Her voice broke. "Your father wouldn't want you to carry that. He's carried enough guilt for this entire family." Rebecca moved closer, finally sat in the chair on the opposite side of the bed, father between them, both holding a hand, both refusing to let go. "Tell me about the box," Rebecca said quietly. "The one in the garage. What's in it?" Linda took a breath. "Your father's past. The parts he couldn't talk about. Photos, letters, dog tags that aren't his. And a letter he wrote. For Marcus's daughter. Emma. He said her name was Emma." "Yes." He's been sending them money. Anonymous. Every month for 22 years. Guilt money, he probably thought, but really? Linda looked at Ethan's face, so still except for the rise and fall of his chest with the ventilator's rhythm. Really, I think it was love. The only way he knew how to show it when he couldn't face them. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. I want to read the letter. When this is over. When he... She couldn't finish. When he wakes up, Linda said firmly. When he wakes up, we'll read it together, all of us. The night stretched on. Doctors came and went. Nurses adjusted medications, checked lines, documented everything in charts that were really just stories of suffering written in medical shorthand. The antibiotics dripped steadily, a chemical army fighting a war inside Ethan's body, and all they could do was wait to see who would win. At 2:47 a.m., the same time Ethan had felt the larva move just days before, the monitors began to scream. His blood pressure plummeted. His heart rhythm, already erratic, became chaotic. The ventilator alarm shrieked as his oxygen saturation dropped. Code Blue, ICU Room 7, Code Blue. The room flooded with people. Someone pulled Linda back, away from the bed. Rebecca stood frozen, watching as they worked on her father. Chest compressions, medications pushed through the central line, the defibrillator pads placed on his chest. Clear! Ethan's body jerked with the shock. Once, twice, 3 times. Linda was screaming, or maybe she was praying, or maybe there was no difference anymore. Rebecca's lips moved silently, and if you'd been close enough, you would have heard her saying the same thing over and over. Don't leave me, Dad. Please don't leave me. Not now. Not like this. The monitors showed a flat line, a horizon with no hope, and for 37 seconds, Linda counted every one. Ethan Carter was dead. Then, as if he'd heard them, as if some stubborn piece of him refused to go, the line jumped. A rhythm appeared. Weak, irregular, but there. We've got him back, someone said. We've got a pulse. But everyone in that room knew the truth. They'd gotten him back, yes, but for how long, and at what cost? As dawn broke over Austin, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan lay in the ICU, hovering in that space between life and death, while the women who loved him most kept vigil and prayed that love would be enough to bring him home. In his fevered dreams, Marcus Williams stood in the desert, whole and healthy, smiling that crooked smile Ethan remembered so well. And Marcus said the words Ethan had waited 22 years to hear. It's okay, brother. It's time to let go. It's time to forgive yourself. But Ethan wasn't ready. Not yet. Because forgiveness, he was learning, wasn't something you granted yourself. It was something you accepted from others. And there were conversations still waiting, truths still unspoken, bridges still to be built. So he turned away from Marcus, turned toward the light that meant life, that meant pain, that meant facing everything he'd run from. And slowly, so slowly, he began the long climb back. Consciousness returned like a slow tide, bringing Ethan back to the world in fragments. First, sensation, the pressure of a hand in his, warm and familiar. Then sound, the steady beep of monitors, the soft hum of machines, voices speaking in hushed tones. Finally, light filtering through closed eyelids and the monumental effort of opening his eyes. Linda's face appeared first, hovering close, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted but bright with relief. Ethan. Oh, thank God. Ethan, can you hear me? He tried to speak but couldn't. Something was in his throat, the breathing tube. He'd been intubated. The realization brought a flash of panic, but Linda's hand tightened on his, grounding him. Don't try to talk. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Her voice broke on the last word, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "You scared us. You scared us so badly." Rebecca appeared on his other side, and the look on her face, relief mixed with something softer, something that looked like forgiveness beginning to take root, made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with his medical condition. Over the next hour they extubated him, removed the breathing tube with care and precise movements. His throat was raw, his voice when it came back barely more than a rasp, but he was breathing on his own. The ventilator that had kept him alive for 36 hours was wheeled away, no longer needed. "The infection?" he managed to ask. Dr. Bennett, who had appeared sometime during the process, answered, "Under control. The antibiotics finally kicked in. Your white blood cell count is coming down, inflammatory markers improving. You're not out of the woods yet, but you're through the worst of it. The retained piece? Still there," she said carefully. "We couldn't risk another surgery while you were septic. But now that you're stable, we need to talk about next steps." She pulled up a chair, sat so she was at eye level with him. "The fragment needs to come out, along with the shrapnel. We can't leave either in there, not after this. Your body has made it very clear it's done carrying foreign objects." Ethan nodded slowly. The movement hurt, but it was a manageable pain. Nothing like the fever dreams and the suffocating sense of drowning in his own inflammation. "When?" "We'll give you a few days to recover. Then we'll schedule a comprehensive surgery. Remove everything, the remaining larval fragment and all 7 pieces of shrapnel. It'll be extensive, probably 3 to 4 hours in the OR, but it's necessary." "Okay," he whispered. Then, looking at Rebecca, "Will you?" "I'll be there," she said before he could finish. "If you want me there, I'll be there. I want you there." Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, some wall coming down inch by painful inch. She nodded, squeezed his hand once, then stepped back to let Dr. Bennett continue the examination. It was 2 hours later, when Ethan had been moved back to a regular room, and the immediate crisis had passed, that Linda finally brought the box. It was smaller than Ethan remembered, a dented green metal container with U.S. Army stenciled on the side in faded white letters. Linda set it on the bed beside him with a heavy thunk that spoke of more than just physical weight. "I haven't opened it," she said quietly. I thought we should do it together. The 3 of us." Rebecca stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, that careful neutrality back on her face, but not quite masking the vulnerability underneath. "What's in there, Dad?" Ethan looked at the box, at 22 years of silence made tangible. His hands trembled as he reached for it, and Linda had to help him lift the lid. The hinges creaked, protesting after so long closed. Inside, the past lay waiting. On top was a photograph, colors faded with age. 2 young men in desert camouflage, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincibility of youth. Ethan, 20 years old and a lifetime ago, and Marcus Williams, with his broad smile and easy laugh and eyes that had seen too much but still found reasons for joy. Rebecca picked up the photo, studied it. "This is him, Marcus?" "Yes." Ethan's voice was thick. "That was taken about a month before it happened." Beneath the photo were Marcus's dog tags, the metal worn smooth from years of Ethan carrying them, touching them, using them as a kind of rosary to count his sins. Rebecca lifted them carefully, read the inscription aloud. "Williams, Marcus J. O. Positive, Baptist." "I told myself I was keeping them safe for his family," Ethan said. "But really, I think I just couldn't let him go." There were more photos. Marcus with his wife Sarah, young and beautiful in her wedding dress. Marcus holding a tiny baby. Emma, Couldn't have been more than a few months old. Each image a life that had been cut short, a future stolen by war and impossible choices. And then, deeper in the box, Linda found them. Receipts. Dozens of them. Wire transfer confirmations, each one documenting a payment to S. Williams. Every month, like clockwork, for 22 years. "Dad," Rebecca breathed, looking at the dates, the amounts. This is thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. $147,300, Ethan said quietly. "I kept track. College fund. I told myself, for Emma. To make up for—" He stopped, swallowed hard. To make up for taking her father. Linda's hand covered her mouth. "Ethan, all these years, all this money. We struggled sometimes, and you were sending—" "I know." He looked at her, this woman who had stood by him through everything without knowing the full weight of what she was carrying. "I know it wasn't fair. I know I should have told you, but I couldn't stop. It was the only way I knew how to—" His voice broke and Linda's arms were around him, careful of his bandages and his IVs, holding him as he finally let himself break. Rebecca was crying too, silent tears streaming down her face as she looked at the evidence of her father's secret penance, his quiet attempt at redemption through a sacrifice no one had asked him to make. "There's more," Linda said gently, reaching into the box. She pulled out an envelope yellowed with age, Ethan's handwriting on the front. "To Emma Williams. When she's old enough." "I wrote it 10 years ago," Ethan said, "when Emma would have been 13, old enough to understand. Maybe. Old enough to hate me properly." He looked at Rebecca. "But I could never bring myself to send it. Could never face telling her the truth." "What does it say?" Rebecca asked. "Everything. What happened. The choice I made. Why her father died. How sorry I am." He reached for the envelope, held it like it might burn him. "I thought, if I wrote it all down, maybe it would hurt less. But it didn't. It just made it more real." Rebecca took the envelope from him with trembling hands. "Can I read it?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, you should. You both should." Linda moved to stand beside Rebecca, and together they read, their eyes moving across the page, taking in Ethan's confession written in ink that had faded from black to gray, but still held the weight of everything he'd never been able to say aloud. When they finished, the silence in the room was profound. Rebecca looked up, and her eyes were swimming with tears. Dad, this wasn't your fault. You were doing your job. You were trying to save lives. I let him die." "No." Rebecca's voice was fierce now. "You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. That's not the same thing. That's not—" She stopped, took a breath. "That's not murder. That's not betrayal. That's just war. And war doesn't leave room for perfect choices." "She's right," Linda said quietly. "Ethan, Marcus's death isn't on you. It's on the war, on the people who sent you there, on the insurgents who planted that IED. But not on you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand. He looked at me, at the end. He knew. He knew I'd chosen the other kid, and he understood, and he forgave me, and that's what makes it worse. He forgave me, and I couldn't forgive myself." "Then maybe," Rebecca said slowly, carefully, "maybe it's time you learned how." She set the letter down, came to his bedside. "Dad, I need to tell you something. About Dr. Bennett. About Emma." Ethan frowned, confused. "What about her?" "Dr. Sarah Bennett, Rebecca said, emphasizing the first name. Do you know what the S stands for in S. Williams? The room seemed to tilt. Sarah? Marcus's wife was Sarah, and his daughter was Emma Sarah Williams. Rebecca's voice was gentle now, guiding him to a realization he couldn't quite believe. Dad, Dr. Bennett, the doctor who operated on you. Her full name is Dr. Emma Sarah Bennett. Bennett is her married name. Her maiden name is Williams, Linda finished, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan, the doctor who saved you, who pulled that thing out of your face, who's been taking care of you. That's Marcus's daughter. That's Emma. The world stopped. Everything. The monitors, his heartbeat, time itself, seemed to freeze as Ethan processed what they were telling him. Emma. Little Emma, who'd been 3 years old the last time he'd seen her photo. Emma, who he'd been sending money to for 22 years without her knowledge. Emma who'd become a doctor, who'd followed a path perhaps inspired by the anonymous benefactor she'd never known existed. Emma who had saved him without knowing who he really was. She doesn't know, he whispered. She doesn't know it was me, that I'm... No, Rebecca said. She doesn't, not yet. But Dad... She squeezed his hand. Don't you think it's time she did? Before Ethan could answer, there was a knock at the door. A familiar voice. Mr. Carter, it's Dr. Bennett. I wanted to check on your progress. The three of them looked at each other, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Then Linda went to the door, opened it. Dr. Bennett stood in the doorway in her white coat, tablet in hand, professional and composed. But when she saw their faces, the tears, the emotional weight in the room, her expression shifted to concern. Is everything all right? Is he... Dr. Bennett, Linda said gently. Emma, there's something you need to know. Something about your father. About Marcus Williams. Emma's face went very still. How do you... Come in, Ethan said, his voice stronger now despite everything. Please, come in. We need to talk. There's something I should have told you 22 years ago. Emma stepped into the room slowly, cautiously, like she was walking into something she couldn't quite see but could sense changing everything. She closed the door behind her. My father, she said carefully, died in Iraq in 2003. I was 3. I barely remember him. I know, Ethan said. I was there. The words hung in the air between them. Emma's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. You were... what? I was there when he died. I was... Ethan's voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. I was the medic who made the choice, who decided to save someone else instead of him. I'm the reason your father died. I'm the reason you grew up without him. Emma stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Disbelief, shock, anger, grief, understanding. You're the one? The medic? My mother, she told me there was a medic, that he'd tried, that there was nothing... She stopped, her mind clearly racing. Carter? Ethan Carter? The anonymous donor? The money that paid for my college, for everything? That was you? Yes. The word was barely audible. Emma's legs seemed to give out. Rebecca quickly pulled a chair behind her, and she sank into it, staring at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. 22 years, she whispered. You've been, all this time, you've been... She looked at the box, at the photos, at the letter with her name on it. What is that? Everything I should have told you, Ethan said. Everything I was too much of a coward to say. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. Your father was my best friend, and I let him die, and I've been trying to make up for it ever since, but I know I can't. I know nothing I do will bring him back, but I had to try. I had to do something. Emma picked up the letter, her hands shaking. She read it slowly, and with each line, more tears fell. When she finished, she looked up at Ethan, and her expression was impossible to read. "You think you killed my father?" she said finally. "I did. I chose—" "You chose to save a life," Emma interrupted. "You chose to do your job, to triage, to make an impossible decision in an impossible situation." She stood, moved closer to his bed. "My father died in a war. But you've been dying from guilt ever since. Carrying it in your body, in your heart, in everything you do. And then you spent 22 years trying to save me, trying to make up for something that wasn't even your fault." "Emma, no." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "Listen to me. I'm a doctor. I make life and death decisions. I know what it costs. I know what it means to choose one patient over another when you can't save both. And if someone spent 22 years hating themselves for doing exactly what I do every day, I'd tell them they were wrong. I'd tell them to forgive themselves." She reached out, took his hand, the same hand that had held her father's as he died, the same hand that had been trying to save her from afar ever since. "You didn't kill my father, Mr. Carter. You tried to save him. And when you couldn't, you made sure his family survived anyway. You gave me a future, college, medical school, the ability to become someone who saves lives, just like you did." Her voice broke. "You gave me the gift of being able to do what you do, to carry on what my father and you both believed in. How could I hate you for that?" Ethan was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Linda held him from one side, Rebecca from the other, and Emma stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her face. This woman who'd saved his life without knowing she was really saving the man who'd spent 22 years trying to save hers. "He forgave you," Emma said softly. "At the end, when he told you to tell us he loved us, that was forgiveness. That was him saying it's okay. That was him trusting you to take care of us. And you did. You kept that promise. Maybe not the way he expected, but you kept it. I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," Emma said. "But you have it anyway. From me. From my father. If you could hear him. And maybe it's time you gave it to yourself." The room was thick with tears and truth, with 22 years of burden finally being lifted, with secrets that had lived like parasites under skin and in hearts finally being extracted and examined in the light. "There's something else," Rebecca said quietly. She looked at Emma. "The shrapnel, the fragments in his face. They're from the same explosion that killed your father." Emma's eyes widened. "He's been carrying, for 22 years, pieces of that day. Physical reminders that he couldn't let go of." Emma looked at Ethan, understanding dawning. "And that's why the larva found that spot, the old wound, the weakened tissue from the shrapnel. Your body was trying to tell you something. It was trying to tell you it was time to let go. All of it. The metal, the guilt, the past. We're scheduling surgery," Dr. Bennett, Emma, continued, shifting into doctor mode even as tears still streaked her face. "To remove everything, the retained larval fragment and all the shrapnel. To finally make you whole again." "Will you?" Ethan's voice was hoarse. "Will you do it? The surgery?" Emma smiled through her tears. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll remove the pieces of the war that killed my father. And maybe in doing that, I can help finish the work he would have wanted, helping you heal, letting you finally come home from that desert." She moved closer, took both his hands now. My father died taking care of his squad, taking care of people he loved, and you've spent 22 years taking care of his family. I think, I think that makes us even. I think that makes us family in a way that goes beyond blood. Don't you?" Ethan couldn't speak, could only nod as fresh tears fell. Linda's hand found Emma's shoulder. "Will you tell your mother about all this?" Emma nodded. "Yes. She needs to know. She spent 22 years wondering who the angel was who saved us. She deserves to know it was him, that it was always him." "I'd like to meet her," Ethan said quietly. "If she'll see me. If she doesn't, she will," Emma said with certainty. "She will. Because my mother, she spent 22 years praying for whoever saved her family. She'll want to thank you, to tell you what I'm telling you now, that you didn't fail us. You saved us, just in a different way than you planned." Rebecca wiped her eyes, looked at Emma. "I can't believe you're here, that you've been here all along, that you're the one who—" She laughed, a sound that was half sob. "God, if that's not the universe telling us something." "It is," Linda said softly. She looked at Ethan, at the man she'd loved for 46 years, who was finally coming out of the shadows he'd been hiding in. "It's telling us that some circles need to be closed, some wounds need to be healed, some truths need to be told." Emma squeezed Ethan's hands once more, then stepped back. "I'll schedule the surgery for next week. We'll take out everything, the fragment, the shrapnel, all of it. And then, Mr. Carter, you're going to start healing, really healing. Not just your face, but everything else you've been carrying." "Thank you," Ethan whispered. "Emma, thank you for being here, for becoming who you are, for being—" His voice broke. "For being proof that something good came from that day, that your father's life meant something, that my choice, even though it cost me my best friend, it saved someone who would go on to save so many others." "Including you," Emma said. "I saved you, just like you've been saving me all along. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that exactly what my father would have wanted?" She left then, needing to process, needing to call her mother, needing to wrap her mind around the revelation that the patient she'd just saved was the man who'd been her anonymous benefactor, her father's best friend, the ghost who'd haunted her family's gratitude for over 2 decades. When the door closed behind her, the three of them, Ethan, Linda, and Rebecca, sat in the quiet, in the aftermath of truth finally spoken. "I love you, Dad," Rebecca said, breaking the silence. "I love you, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to say it again." "I love you too," Ethan replied. "I always did. I just didn't know how to show it when I was so busy carrying the dead." Linda leaned her head against his shoulder, careful of the bandages, careful of the IVs, but needing the contact. 46 years, she said, and I feel like I'm finally meeting my husband for the first time, the real one. The one without the armor. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, "for all of it, for shutting you out, for the secrets, for—" "Shh," Linda silenced him with a gentle finger to his lips. "We have time now, time to rebuild, time to heal, time to finally be the family we always should have been." Outside the window, the sun was setting over Austin, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and gold. Inside room 407, a family that had been broken by secrets and silence and the weight of war began the slow, painful, beautiful work of putting itself back together. And somewhere in the hospital, Emma Williams Bennett stood in an empty hallway, phone in hand, preparing to call her mother and tell her that the angel who'd saved them had finally revealed himself. That forgiveness had found its way home. That love, even when buried under years of guilt and grief, could still bloom. The surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 1 week to prepare, 1 week to heal enough to withstand being opened again. 1 week for Ethan to ready himself to finally let go of the pieces of war he'd been carrying. And this time, he wouldn't be alone. This time, his family would be there, all of it, blood and chosen both, to help him through. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin until you stop hiding. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come until you're brave enough to ask for it. And sometimes, the thing you think is destroying you is really just forcing everything you've buried to finally surface. So it can be released. So you can be free. So you can finally, after 22 years of carrying the dead, learn to live again. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. Emma would lead the team with Dr. Bennett assisting and Rebecca observing. 3 surgeons, 4 hours and 22 years of buried pain finally coming to an end. But first there was something Ethan needed to do. On Sunday afternoon, 2 days before the surgery, a woman walked into room 407. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held both strength and sorrow. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a worn leather purse clutched tight against her side. Sarah Williams, Marcus's widow, Emma's mother. Linda stood to greet her, extending her hand. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for coming. Please, call me Sarah." Her voice was soft but steady. She looked past Linda to the man in the bed, and her eyes filled with tears. "So, you're him." "You're the one." Ethan tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pull of his IVs and the bandage on his face. Rebecca moved to help him, adjusting his pillows, but he waved her off gently. This was something he needed to face on his own. "Mrs. Williams, Sarah, I don't know what Emma told you, but I need you to know." His voice cracked. "I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Marcus was my brother in every way that mattered, and I let him die. I made a choice, and because of that choice, you lost your husband and Emma lost her father, and I've spent 22 years trying to make up for it. But I know I can't. I know nothing I do will ever—" "Stop." Sarah's voice was firm but not unkind. She moved closer to the bed, set her purse down on the chair Rebecca had vacated. "Emma told me everything, about the ambush, about the choice you had to make, about the money you've been sending all these years." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of letters, bound with a faded ribbon. "These are letters Marcus sent me from Iraq, before he died. Would you like to hear what he said about you?" Ethan couldn't speak, could only nod. Sarah opened the first letter, dated 2 months before the ambush. Her voice was steady as she read. "There's this guy in my unit, Carter, Ethan Carter, best damn medic I've ever seen. He saved Rodriguez last week, pulled him out of a burning vehicle with his hands still smoking. He's the kind of guy you want next to you when things go bad, the kind who won't leave you behind no matter what." She moved to another letter, this one dated 3 weeks before Marcus died. "Carter and I were talking last night about what we'd do when we get home. He wants to be a teacher. Can you believe it? Says he wants to help kids, teach them to be strong. I told him he'd be good at it. He's got that way about him, makes you want to be better than you are." Sarah's voice wavered on the next one, the last letter Marcus had written, dated 2 days before the ambush. "If something happens to me, Sarah, I need you to know something. Carter, he's the best of us. If anyone can bring me home, it's him. And if he can't, if the worst happens, don't blame him. Don't ever blame him. He'll blame himself enough for everybody. Tell him I said to let it go. Tell him to live. Tell him that's an order from his sergeant." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah folded the letters carefully, returned them to her purse, then looked at Ethan with eyes that held no anger, only understanding. "My husband knew," she said quietly. "He knew what could happen. He knew the risks, and he trusted you. He loved you like a brother. And brothers don't blame each other for the accidents of war. She reached out, took Ethan's hand. You didn't fail him. You honored him. For 22 years you've been honoring him by taking care of his family. That's not penance. That's love. I chose someone else, Ethan whispered. I had to choose, and I chose. You chose to save a life, Sarah interrupted gently. Just like Marcus would have wanted. Just like he trained you to do. My husband died doing his job, protecting his squad. You lived doing yours, saving who you could save. There's no failure in that. There's only tragedy. And we've all carried it long enough. She squeezed his hand, and Ethan felt something inside him crack open, not breaking but releasing. 22 years of holding himself together, of carrying guilt like armor. And here was Marcus's widow, the woman he'd wronged most, telling him to let it go. I don't know how, he admitted, tears streaming down his face. I don't know how to forgive myself. Then let us forgive you, Sarah said simply. Let Emma forgive you. Let your family forgive you. Let Marcus forgive you, because he already did 22 years ago in that desert. He forgave you with his last breath when he told you to take care of his girls. That wasn't a burden. That was a gift. He was giving you a purpose, a way to keep living when he couldn't. Linda was crying now, and Rebecca too, and even Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. But they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away old wounds instead of opening new ones. There's something else, Emma said from the doorway. They all turned to see her standing there in street clothes, off duty but clearly unable to stay away. Something I need you to see, Mr. Carter. She came in carrying a framed photograph. When she held it up, Ethan saw Marcus again, but this time he was surrounded by people. Sarah, young and radiant, Emma as a toddler on his shoulders, and in the background, barely visible, another figure in uniform. This was taken a week before the ambush, Emma said. My mom found it in an old album. Look in the background. Ethan squinted and his breath caught. The figure in the background was him. Younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. And he was laughing at something Marcus had said, his whole face lit up with the kind of joy he couldn't remember feeling since. You were family even then, Emma said softly. You were in our family photo, and you didn't even know it. The universe was already telling us, you belong with us. You always have. She set the photo on the bedside table where Ethan could see it. When I do your surgery on Tuesday, I'm not just removing shrapnel. I'm removing the last physical pieces of the war that took my father. And I'm doing it not as revenge, not as closure, but as healing. For all of us. Because you're not just my patient. You're family. And family takes care of each other. Sarah nodded, her hand still holding Ethan's. Emma's right. When Marcus died, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost his whole squad, his brothers, everyone who knew him the way I did. But you... She looked at Ethan with an expression of profound tenderness. You were there all along. Anonymous, hidden, but there. And now that I know, now that we know, I don't want to lose you again. I don't want any of us to lose each other again. What are you saying? Ethan asked, his voice small, uncertain. I'm saying that the family Marcus left behind isn't complete without you, Sarah replied. I'm saying that Emma deserves to know her father's best friend. I'm saying that you've been an uncle to her all these years without being able to claim the title, and it's time that changed. She smiled through her tears. I'm saying welcome home, Ethan. Welcome to the family you should have been part of all along. Ethan broke then, completely and utterly. He sobbed like he hadn't sobbed since that day in the desert, great heaving cries that came from somewhere deep and long buried. Linda held him from one side, Rebecca from the other, and Sarah's hand stayed in his, anchoring him, reminding him he wasn't alone. Emma stood at the foot of the bed. This woman who'd saved his life and was about to do it again, and she was smiling. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday we remove the metal. And then, Mr. Carter, then you start really living. No more carrying the dead. No more penance. Just life. Just family. Just love." The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of conversation and tears and laughter. The kind that comes after crying, when you're so wrung out that joy feels almost painful. Sarah told stories about Marcus that Ethan had never heard, civilian stories from before the deployment. Emma shared memories of growing up with an anonymous benefactor, not knowing who to thank, creating an image in her mind of an angel who turned out to be beautifully, perfectly human. They ordered dinner, pizza, because Emma insisted it was her father's favorite and therefore a tradition worth honoring, and ate together in that hospital room, a family assembled from fragments, pieced together by tragedy and time and the stubborn refusal to let guilt win. As evening fell and visiting hours drew to a close, Sarah stood to leave. But before she did, she reached into her purse one more time and pulled out a small velvet box. "These were Marcus's," she said, opening it to reveal a pair of dog tags, identical to the ones Ethan had been wearing all these years. "Emma told me you've been wearing his tags, the ones from the field. But these are his dress tags, the ones he wore for ceremonies. I want you to have them, to wear them, not as penance but as family, as a brother who's finally come home." She placed them in Ethan's hands and he held them like they were sacred, which in a way they were. "Thank you," he whispered, "for forgiving me." "For letting me?" He couldn't finish, but Sarah understood. "There's nothing to forgive," she said simply. "There's only love, and we have plenty of that to go around." She kissed his forehead, the way a mother might, or a sister or family. Then she hugged Linda, hugged Rebecca, hugged Emma, bringing them all into a circle that had always been there, just waiting for someone to acknowledge it. When she left, she took with her 22 years of Ethan's guilt, leaving behind something he'd forgotten how to feel: hope. That night, as the hospital quieted and Linda dozed in the chair beside his bed, Ethan lay awake staring at the two photographs now on his bedside table. The old one of him and Marcus, young and invincible. The new one of Marcus's family with Ethan in the background, unknowingly already part of something larger than himself. And he thought about Tuesday, about Emma's hands removing the metal, about Rebecca watching, learning, understanding, about Linda beside him through it all, about Sarah waiting somewhere in the city, praying for the man who'd been an angel to her family and was finally learning he deserved wings too. "I'm ready," he whispered to the darkness, to Marcus, to himself. "I'm ready to let go. I'm ready to heal. I'm ready to live." And for the first time in 22 years, he believed it. Monday passed in a haze of pre-surgical preparations, blood work, imaging, consent forms, and consultations with the surgical team. Emma explained the procedure in detail: the incision sites, the careful extraction of each piece of shrapnel, the closure, the recovery time. Rebecca asked technical questions, already thinking ahead to complications, to outcomes, to the man her father would be when the metal was finally gone. But beyond the medical details, there was something else happening. A shift. A lightening. Ethan felt it in his chest, in his breathing, in the way he could finally look his daughter in the eye without shame weighing down his gaze. They talked, really talked, for the first time in 3 years, about Rebecca's divorce, about why Ethan had defended James, about the ghosts he'd been trying to save through proxy. Rebecca told him about her ex-husband's struggles, about how she'd tried to help but couldn't fix what was broken. And Ethan told her the truth he should have shared years ago, that some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are, and that's okay. That survival isn't the same as victory, and sometimes just getting through the day is heroic enough. "I wish I'd known," Rebecca said, "about Marcus, about what you were carrying. Maybe I would have understood." "I wish I'd told you," Ethan replied. "But I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me the way I saw myself, as someone who'd failed when it mattered most. I never would have seen you that way. I know that now." He took her hand. "But I spent so long not forgiving myself that I couldn't imagine anyone else forgiving me either. It's a lonely way to live." "You don't have to be lonely anymore," Rebecca said. "You have us. You have Sarah and Emma. You have a family that's bigger than you knew. All you have to do is let us in." "I'm trying," Ethan said. "For the first time in 22 years, I'm really trying." That evening, Tom Reynolds visited, his colleague, his friend, the one who'd told him that story about his grandfather digging something out of himself with a fish hook and whiskey. Tom stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, studying Ethan with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize transformation when it happened. "You look different," Tom said finally. "Lighter somehow, even with all those tubes and machines." "I feel different," Ethan admitted. "Turns out I've been carrying more than just a parasite and some shrapnel." Tom nodded slowly. "The heavy stuff, the invisible stuff, that's always the hardest to let go of." He pulled up a chair, sat down. "You know, my granddad, the one I told you about, the thing he dug out of himself, it wasn't just some bug or infection, it was guilt over something that happened in Korea. He carried it for 30 years before he finally dealt with it. Went to his grave without ever really talking about it." "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "Don't be. Be better. Be the guy who talks about it, who lets people help, who understands that carrying the weight alone doesn't make you strong, it just makes you tired." Tom leaned forward. "You've got a second chance here, Carter. Not many people get that. Don't waste it." "I won't," Ethan promised. "Not this time." Tom left with a handshake that turned into a hug, awkward and brief but sincere. And Ethan added him to the growing list of people who'd been there all along, waiting for him to let them matter. As night fell on Monday, the hospital settled into its familiar rhythm, beeping monitors, distant voices, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Linda had gone home to shower and change, promising to be back first thing in the morning. Rebecca was on call but would be in the OR the next day. Sarah had texted that she'd be in the waiting room praying. Ethan lay in the quiet, counting down the hours until surgery, until the removal, until the final extraction of everything he'd been carrying. He thought about the larva, that pale, segmented thing that had burrowed into him, fed on him, forced everything else to surface. In a strange way, he was almost grateful to it. Without it, the shrapnel might have stayed buried forever. Without it, he might never have faced his daughter. Without it, Sarah and Emma might never have known who their angel was. Sometimes, he realized, the things that hurt us are really just the universe's way of forcing us to heal. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Tomorrow we remove the metal. But tonight I want you to know something. My father would be proud of you. For surviving. For taking care of us. For finally taking care of yourself. Sleep well, Uncle Ethan." Uncle Ethan. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Uncle Ethan. Family. Belonging. He typed back with shaking fingers. "Thank you for everything. For being who you are. For saving me in more ways than one. Your father raised an incredible daughter. I'm honored to know you." Her reply came immediately. "He didn't raise me. You both did. Him in memory, you in action. That makes you as much my father as he was. Sleep now. Tomorrow you get to wake up free." Ethan set the phone aside and closed his eyes. The new dog tags, Marcus's dress tags rested against his chest beside the old ones he'd worn for so long. 2 sets, 2 brothers, one story finally being told. "I'm ready, Marcus," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm ready to live the life you wanted me to have. I'm ready to honor you by being happy, by letting go, by loving your family the way you would have wanted, openly, proudly, without shame." In his mind, he could almost hear Marcus laughing, that deep, warm laugh he remembered from desert nights and bad jokes and moments of grace in the middle of hell. Could almost hear him saying what Sarah had read in those letters. "Let it go, brother. That's an order." "Yes, sir," Ethan whispered. "Consider the order received." He drifted to sleep then, his last conscious thought a prayer. Not for himself, but for everyone who'd carried him through this. Linda, Rebecca, Emma, Sarah, Tom, Dr. Bennett. Every person who'd refused to let him face his demons alone. And somewhere in that sleep he dreamed. He dreamed of a desert, but not the one he'd left. This desert was beautiful. Golden sand, clear sky, peace in every direction. And there, standing in the distance, was Marcus. Whole, healthy, smiling. "You did good, brother," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the sand. "You took care of my girls. You took care of yourself. You survived. That's all I ever wanted." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, even in the dream unable to let go completely. "I know," Marcus replied, "but you don't have to be anymore. You're forgiven. You always were. Now go live. Live for both of us. That's how you honor me. Not by dying slowly with guilt, but by living fully with love." Marcus began to walk away into the golden distance, and Ethan wanted to follow, wanted to stay in this place where his friend was alive and whole, but Marcus turned back one last time. "Take care of them," he said. "Sarah, Emma, your family, they need you. Not the guilty you, not the broken you, the real you, the you that's been waiting under all that weight. Let him out. Let him live. Let him love." "I will," Ethan promised. "I know," Marcus said. And then, with that crooked smile Ethan had loved like a brother, "See you later, Carter. Much later. You've got a lot of living to do first." The dream faded, and Ethan sank into deeper sleep. Peaceful sleep. Healing sleep. When he woke on Tuesday morning to the sound of nurses preparing him for surgery, he felt different. Lighter already, before the first cut had even been made. Linda was there, holding his hand. Rebecca in her scrubs, ready to observe. And somewhere in the building, Emma was scrubbing in, preparing to remove the metal, to finish what had started in a desert 22 years ago. "Ready?" Linda asked softly. Ethan looked at his wife, his daughter, and beyond them to the family he'd gained. Sarah, Emma, all the people who'd chosen to love him despite everything. "Yes," he said, and meant it. "I'm ready to be free." They wheeled him toward the OR, toward healing, toward the future that had been waiting all along for him to be brave enough to claim it. The surgery would take 4 hours, the recovery, weeks, the emotional healing, maybe years. But for the first time since March 19, 2003, Ethan Carter was moving toward life instead of away from it. And that, more than any surgical success, was the real miracle. Sometimes we carry wounds we can't see, guilt over choices made, grief over losses we couldn't prevent, shame over simply surviving when others didn't. Like Ethan, we bury these burdens deep, thinking that if we just carry them quietly enough, long enough, they'll somehow become bearable. But buried pain doesn't heal. It festers. It grows. It eventually forces its way to the surface, one way or another. Ethan spent 22 years carrying pieces of war in his body and his heart, convinced he didn't deserve forgiveness, didn't deserve peace. It took a crisis, something living inside him that refused to be ignored, to finally force the truth out. But here's what he learned. Forgiveness isn't something we earn. Love isn't something we deserve. They're gifts, freely given by the people who see us, really see us, and choose to love us anyway. If you're carrying something heavy, a choice you regret, a person you lost, a version of yourself you can't forgive, know this: you don't have to carry it alone. The people who love you want to help shoulder the weight. They're waiting for you to let them in. And when you finally do, when you finally allow yourself to be seen in all your broken, beautiful humanity, you might discover what Ethan did, that the family you have is bigger than you knew. The love surrounding you is stronger than you imagined, and freedom is just one moment of courage away. What burden have you been carrying alone that might be lighter if you shared it? Have you ever experienced the healing power of forgiveness, either giving it or receiving it? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's create a community where no one has to carry their pain in silence anymore.